Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. The Grant. My name is Niels Winter, and I'm the creator, editor, and host of The Grant. The Grant is an independent podcast initiative with the ambition to dig into all corners of the EU R&D funding system on topics of interest for the full EU R&D funding community. First, if you are in Brussels Friday the 20th of June, you're invited to drop by Place du Luxembourg for the Grand Brussels meetup. Yeah, I will be there from 4 o'clock. Come for a drink, chat with me and other The Grant listeners. That's the whole point. Yeah? So go to thegrant.eu for more info. I put a banner in the top where you can check in on the link in the event. Now, this episode is part of my new SME series with focus on SMEs and EU funding. Everybody wants SMEs, everybody talks about SMEs. SMEs are a topic of continuous interest from the EU Commission. I have myself been wanting to zoom in on them since I started this podcast 3 years ago, but they are not so easy to get on board. So I started somewhere else. Alicja Grzegorzek Carrascosa is co-founder of Polite Europe, which is a consultancy company specialized in legal and financial counseling and management for SMEs and EU funding projects. We agreed to do a handful of episodes zooming in on exactly this: rules and regulations for SMEs and EU projects. And the challenges, naturally. And why is that a good idea? That's because this is what worries SMEs most, and this is where they often really burn their fingers on the wonderful EU-funded projects. In this first episode, we zoom in on eligibility challenges for SMEs and EU projects, where we get geeky on employment contracts, cost models, and give important advice on how to deal with this. Important for SMEs, as well as SME funding facilitators out there. Please enjoy. Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. Today, I am introducing yet another series. I love series because it's so nice. You can keep adding bits and pieces here and there to add on the picture, because you're never really finished with anything within EU R&D funding. So it's fantastic. Now, SMEs, we're going to have a talk about them in this series. And I have a guest. Alicja, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
Finally, we manage.
Wasn't easy.
Yeah, behind the curtain, I can tell you that we keep having blockages and bottlenecks for this recording that we've been planning for a while now, Alicja. But now we finally managed to record the first episode here. It's Thursday before Easter, so we both want to get home to our families.
Exactly.
Alicja, can you shortly present yourself to the dear listeners?
Yeah, thank you for your invitation first. And my name is Alicja Grzegorzek Carrascosa, and I'm the co-founder of company Polite. At Polite, mainly we support organizations, SMEs, with legal and financial project management. So we make sure that the project is implemented according to the rules. We make sure that in case of an audit, all the costs will be accepted so that the money is safe, because as you can imagine with the grants, not only rights are coming, but also the obligations. So our objective is that the company can be focused on the technical work, on the implementation of the project, while we deal with all the bureaucracy and rules and so on. So basically we know annotated grant agreement inside out. We know all the rules, and also we know how to apply them in practice, because it's not always so obvious. We've been supporting more than 300 cases now, so we can tell you that we've seen a lot. That's why I'm here today. I'm also vice president of the European Association of Innovation Consultants. So this is an association gathering consultants in the field of European research and innovation projects. And this makes me, it gives me opportunity to influence and lobby for clear rules and clarifications from the EC for all the rules which are not clear.
Indeed, you are. It's a nice organization. Any grants consultancy company should have a look at that and see if it's interesting to be a member. So it's always good to have someone representing you in Brussels, no matter what socioeconomic sphere you are in.
Definitely. I invite, all the companies from the sector, although we don't accept every company, then first you need to pass our due diligence to make sure, we accept your application. But yeah.
Yeah. So now we're going to have a talk about rules. Yeah, we're going to talk about conditions for SMEs here. And this is, this podcast has a lot of different aspects. I try to cover the whole space, but at the end of the day, what beneficiaries they worry most about, that's the money and the regulations around the money. Yeah. And so in this respect, probably you're going to have a lot of listeners for these episodes because when you zoom out and look, I have many interesting episodes with how to write proposals with AI and, of European University Alliances, a lot of these kind of that. But this nitty-gritty things is something that has a huge impact on organizations, especially SMEs, when they involve themselves in this. So it's that's my prediction. Yeah, it's going to be quite many listeners for this. No. Fly in, Alicja. Short overall introduction to this issue. So we sketched out 4 episodes, right? And here in the first episode, we're going to have a talk about the eligibility challenges for the SMEs. So can you qualify that, just a short fly-in?
Yeah, of course. So, in general, I would say that the rules are quite challenging for SMEs because many times this is the first time they are participating in EU project. Maybe they have 2, 3, but not more. So suddenly they need to understand all the rules, how to apply them in practice. Why many times they don't have, a department behind to support them because the team is limited. So they need to find resources to learn and to understand the risks and how to apply the rules in practice. So I would say this is a big challenge for SMEs. And then if you want to have a look at specific rules which are very challenging, I would start with SME owners. I don't know if you're all familiar with this concept and what does it mean, because it's not always so obvious. So basically we are talking about persons who are directly owners of the company. So basically shareholders or co-owners. It can also happen that you are not the only shareholder. There are more shareholders. So every single shareholder is an SME owner for the EC. Okay, it can even happen that you have 1% of shares. Still, you are an SME owner. But the important thing is that you are directly a shareholder. So it's not through a holding company, for example, which is very popular in many countries.
Mm-hmm. And see, this is now, let's just move directly into the block here, the SME eligibility issue. So each country can have many kinds of different ways of ownership structure, or the ways you can register your company, or who's owning what, and how is it? Is it between 2 persons? Is it 1 person? Is it a group? But I think it's very important what you say here. Yeah, this is a translation of how this is being perceived legally by the European Commission.
Exactly. So if you are a person and if you own directly as you some shares in an SME, then for the EC you are considered an SME owner. And then we open another box, what to do in this situation and what are the options and why is it so challenging? Because in the end, you may say that okay, I'm the same SME owner. Okay, what's new? What's so complicated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what we have here in our little rundown here, so we have 2 overall bullets: understanding SME owner costs, and then we have 2 ways SMEs owners can charge that time. So we will get back. That's more detailed. So if we start with the first one. So here, when it comes to costs, the cost categories, differences between SME owner costs and employee costs. Can you fold that out?
Yeah, so basically, if you are an SME owner, you have two options how to charge your cost to the project. Okay. First situation will be that you have a regular employment contract as every employee and the salary. And then it's simple because basically you would apply all the same rules that you are applying for all your employees. And basically you would use actual cost declaration. You would calculate daily rate. You would take, all the company costs, salary, everything that's included in the payslip, and you would calculate it following Horizon Europe methodology for daily rate calculation. Okay, so this is simple. Okay, then we treat it the same way as every employee. But then, as you can imagine, many times SME owners of the company, they don't have an employment contract and a salary. They are remunerated by dividends, service contract, or maybe they don't even get any remuneration. Okay. So in this situation, when we have no employment contract nor salary, we should go with so-called unit cost. So basically the European Commission define a unit cost per country, which should be used for every day that the SME owner is dedicating for the project. So then we don't use this calculation that I mentioned. We just use the daily rate unit cost that EC is forcing you to apply in every country. And this is what we use for cost calculation. Actually, maybe as an anecdote, I don't know if you know why the Commission did introduce this SME owners some years ago. It was to help SMEs because they noticed that there are many owners who are working on the project, but at the same time, they are at the very beginning of the business journey and they don't get any remuneration. So they considered it's unfair that you are working on the project, but you don't get any money out of it because the owner was not getting any money. So they said, okay, for this situation, let's introduce this unit cost. So this way, at least the company will be able to get some money for the work of the owner. Then it can be paid, with a service contract, invoice, whatever, to the owner to help them at this beginning of this journey. But then, everything is getting more and more complicated. And now we have different challenges because we have less and less owners working without any salary. And it brings us to more challenges.
Yeah. This is what we're talking about here. So it is when you move into EU R&D funding, when you sit and you need to prepare the budget for a proposal. You have maybe been invited in to a Horizon Europe project, or you are looking at an EIC accelerator. One of these funding schemes that run with the specific way that the Commission wants you to calculate your budget for the project. And this is where we're talking about here. So when you need to send, when your coordinator asks you to forward a budget, then you need to know this. Because if it applies to you, if you don't have a salary, because you are a startup SME, or you basically you have been running for a while, but still you don't have. So this is in this respect where you need to understand for your country, what is your rate? What can you claim in the budget that you need to send in for the next covering for the next 3 years, for the 3 years that the project rules. So it's an important piece of information.
It is, although also I must say that I rather see this problem appearing a little bit later. So I haven't seen this a lot at the proposal stage, because at the proposal stage, many times you're in rush, you don't have time to understand all the rules. So basically, you skip this detail, you calculate that the owner will be charged under employment cost as all other employees. But then during the grant agreement preparation phase, the project officer will rather ask you about this. Okay, how are you going to cover SME owner cost and so on? And this is also the moment when you can update this. If not, you can do this also during reporting. But in the end, the biggest problem that you may have as an SME is that you've done it incorrectly during the reporting. Then you have an audit, and then the auditor considers that you've been charging the cost of SME owner under wrong category. then they will force you to recalculate everything. And depending on the result, it may, it may happen that you will have to pay back 100K, for example. And this is something that can kill a small company. So this is the biggest.
Nobody wants that.
So this is the biggest risk. Okay. If you have a project, that was just funded, and this is the first time that you hear about the SME owner, don't panic. You can still solve it.
Excellent, because that's the most important thing, that if you do ask in due time. Yeah. If you don't just throw everything up in the air, let everything roll.
If you finish the project and you didn't know about it and you think it can be your case, then just start praying that you're not going to get an audit.
Yeah, cross everything you have. Alicja, so here there are two ways that the SMEs owners, they can charge their time. Can you share how this is? What are these? How can they do it?
Okay, so in practice, you go, if you have this employment contract and a salary, so basically you will apply the same cost calculation as you do for employees. And if you don't have an employment contract and salary, then basically the only thing you need is to have timesheets, because still you need timesheets. So you should follow the same template and the same time recording system policy that you're applying for your employees. And that's all that you need in terms of calculation, because the rest will be done automatically in the system. So when you will include the number of days that the SME owner dedicated to the project during the reporting period, then the system will apply this unit cost and will calculate automatically what's the amount. And then it can happen that the SME owner, in fact, is issuing a monthly invoice to the company, which is higher than the unit cost that is used for the project. And actually, this is a big problem, because many times it's what's going to happen, because the unit cost, which is used by the European Commission, is underestimated. So many times the cost of the SME owner is much higher. And when I'm saying much higher, I'm saying like 2, 3, 4, 5 times higher than the one that you are forced to use by the European Commission. So the unit cost.
Yeah. So of course vital, because this is what they base their funding on. Yeah. Do you have any examples of SMEs that have struggled? Do you have some where you, other than what you have already mentioned, is that examples of that SMEs can relate to, that you've seen in your work? Where you different examples of.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is to decide if you go with this unit cost, or if you can go with the employment contract and salary, so basically actual cost. Why is it so difficult? Because depending on the country, we have different challenges. Maybe we can take as an example Spain, because this is very, very popular. So basically in Spain, if you are an owner of the company, you may have a typical situation that basically you invoice the company, your own company. So you are so-called autónomo, and you are issuing your invoices and so on. Then we have a clear situation. There is no employment contract nor salary. There is an invoice. There is no option to charge this with actual cost. We have to go with unit cost. So even though the cost is lower, you're losing money somehow, there's no doubt, okay? You have to go with SME owner rate. But then you're going to have a situation with so-called trabajador autónomo societario. For our Spanish SMEs, this will sound familiar. So basically, here the situation is that SME owner has no employment contract, but he receives a fixed remuneration paid in the format of monthly payroll. And here we have this gray zone, okay? Because we have a monthly salary, but we don't have an employment contract as such, because according to the law, you don't need to have it. Also, the social security you are paying is different and so on. So here, the company has to take a decision. Okay, do I go with this actual cost because I believe that this is the same as an employment contract, or do I go with unit cost? And, the thing is that many times the difference will be very big in terms of money. So, of course, the company will tend to go with actual cost. But it can happen that during the audit, the auditor will say, no, you should go as with unit cost, and we recalculate everything, and you have to pay back a lot of money. So there is no clear explanation, nor from the European Commission, nor from the auditors, which option should be applied here. And we have something similar in France, for example, with mandataire société. So this is something that happens a lot.
Let's jump directly into practical advice for SMEs, because this is what we're going to talk about now, right? So what do you do? So what do you actually do? So when you have these gray zone, when you have these different kind of company structures throughout each EU country, what is your advice? How would you attack this?
Well, if your company is big enough, and if you have enough budget to spend it, even with less cost from SME owner, I would say don't risk. Go with unit cost. So basically, charge less cost, even though the cost for the company for your time spent on the project is higher, because at this way you avoid the risk of this cost being rejected in future. But what happens with SMEs many times that they don't have a lot of buffer. So it's not like, okay, still I have 20 employees, 40 employees, and I'm not going to notice this difference. So what we can do to protect us somehow, first of all, would be to consult this with the project officer. Okay, I can also tell you that depending on the project officer, feedback will be different, but just take the feedback that you received and save it for future audits, because even though they always say that their emails are not legally binding, we know that it helps in case of an audit. So you can talk to the auditor saying like, look, we received this feedback from the project officer. Second point would be check with your national contact point. But once again, it doesn't mean that you will receive clear answer, because there's no clear answer. There is no clear explanation for this. And third, discuss this with auditors, with experienced EU auditors, because also then you can receive different feedback. And if you gather all these feedbacks, then decide if it's worth taking a risk or not. But also there are, other points to have in mind, because also some auditors, they are saying that with all these SME owners, employment contract and so on, it's a question of subordination, right? So who is signing timesheets? Just make sure that you have all the paperwork in place and it's like 100% correct, and that this is the only thing that they could question, right? Because if this is gray zone, then you look at your timesheets and you are signing your own timesheets because you are the owner of the company and you are the boss and so on, then you have more chances to get this cost rejected.
The thing is, the European Commission always says, like it's a basic accountant principle is that you should use the budget principles that you always use for the company in other circumstances.
Right? Indeed.
So if you follow this, so if you can prove that you didn't ram up, that you didn't go for a different principle for the project, that you have done as you always do in all your businesses, then you have a good case.
Yes, although it's difficult to find a benchmark at the national level and in your company operations for SME owner, because this is something that was invented by the European Commission. This SME owner concept, unit cost concept, and so on. So then it's like, how do you compare? Usually at national level, at least not in Spain, as far as I know, something like SME owner does not exist. Because in the end, this unit cost is something virtual. So it can happen that European Commission is paying to the company, but in the end, the owner is not even getting this money. So it's everything is about, putting different amounts in the cost reporting.
Yeah. Well, I would say, and then if you save everything, archive it, check if you can with a commission representative, project office, check with national support, national contact points. You might not have the money to pay a local accountant, but if you have an accountant for your company, or if your accountant has in that person's network, someone who has worked with this before, has knowledge of it. That's probably the best you can do. Then you can't cover yourself more.
Get as many confirmations as possible. Consult with people who are working with this, because also it's something that's evolving. Okay, so today I'm explaining you this, but probably 5 months ago I would explain you this a little bit differently, because with every case we are learning, with every audit we are learning. So I hope that in 1 year we'll know more. And also the Commission, they are clarifying the rules from time to time. Actually, they've just published updated annotated grant agreement, although they haven't mentioned anything about the SME owner. So, it can happen that sooner or later, this will become less gray zone. Also at personal level, I'm trying to influence, to make this rule more bright, let's say. Let's see if one day we will see it.
And you can never, and that, of course, that's the problem for the European Commission, is that you have 27 member states and they cannot enforce company models.
No, but we could prepare a list of specific cases for specific countries. So, I mean, I can help them really to make a list of doubtful cases, country by country. I mentioned you Spanish case, I mentioned you French case, but then if we go to the Netherlands, to Belgium, we have a problem with this indirect shareholders, okay? Because, having a holding company in the middle is very, very popular. And we would say, so it's clear here because, they are not direct shareholders, so it doesn't apply. But then the project officer will tell you, but this is artificial. You are trying to hide that you are an SME owner, so still the SME owner rules are applying for you. Like, how, if it's not like this in annotated grant agreement? So we can really identify where is the problem, in which country, what's the situation. So I can imagine that we produce a document saying, like, country by country, the specific cases. So in case of this, we go with option A. In case of this country, we go with option B. Because now it's really unfair, because it can happen that you have the same situation in two companies, but in the end, different auditors will judge this differently. And once again, we are talking about a lot of money.
Yeah, you know what? You can make a lot of rules about a lot of other things. So this should actually not be the most complicated case to say, okay, we have 27 countries. These are the different company types. I know that some would beg to differ, but I can actually agree with you that it should not be. There's a lot of people sitting over there.
Yeah.
I'm in Brussels now. That's why I say over there. It's you would be able to make such a thing also for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Because it doesn't look serious if you have, I know some SMEs, they're involved in different projects, so they have different project officers and they receive different feedback. So it's like, but still the same company, the same situation. How is it possible that we are receiving different guidance for different projects?
Yeah, and if you want to zoom a little bit out and look at what does the company owners, what do they think about this? They have maybe been encouraged, maybe they've been asked by to join, or it's very something. It's not that easy to get SMEs to do these kind of things, but the commission, they really want more SMEs to join funded projects, right? They really want to encourage them to join. They really want to help them de-risk their innovation and technology development. And you don't want to push them away.
Yeah, because it's overcomplicating.
Bureaucratic.
It's overcomplicating something simple. Because I would say that even if it would be more fair if you put a clear rule, like, okay, SME owners always with unit cost. We don't care if you have an employment contract, salary, pay slip. You don't get any money. You always go with this unit cost. Yep. Okay, sometimes it's not going to be beneficial for the company from financial point of view, but at least you have clear rules. So you know from the very beginning, okay, here I'm losing this money or whatever. But, the worst is if you think that, 200K will be eligible, then you have an audit in 2, 3, 4 years. Then they claim like only half is eligible, and then you have to pay back a lot of money. So,
which it can easily be. It can easily be cut in half, slashed. It doesn't take much in this world.
Yeah.
But you don't want to take money. Don't throw good money after bad money, so to say, right? It's the worst thing you can do as a small company.
Yeah, although I think that now, as they just changed a few months ago, the unit cost that is applied, so now it's much higher, and usually it's closer to the real salaries. So also the differences are lower now. So I believe that from now on, the SMEs will be deciding to go with the safer option, with unit cost. So let's see how it works, right? But also to say something positive, the Commission has also improved this. So they changed the unit cost. They increased this basically.
Yeah. Is there anything in relation to lump sum that affects this lump sum projects?
Good question. So, well, you know that in lump sum, in fact, the same rules for eligibility applies. So we have the same problem, but it should be treated at an earlier stage. So at the proposal stage or during the grant agreement preparation stage, because then you don't have reporting. So actually the company, the SME, should be able to detect this topic earlier and solve it in advance, right? And we see now that during the grant agreement preparation, the project officers, they really try to clarify this with SMEs. So yeah, it's the same basically. The only thing that's earlier.
All right, good. Do you have anything else you want to say on the practical advice?
So I would say that just make sure that you consult this if there is a gray zone, and if you are not clear which rules should apply, just get as many opinions as possible, because it can cost you a lot of money.
All right. It's a nice and short episode, this one. The toughest challenge, I always have it. So what is the toughest challenge for SMEs to understand these rules?
Well, I think the most difficult is if you consult it everywhere and you receive different feedback from the project officer, different feedback from an auditor, from national contact point.
Yeah.
And then in the end, you have to take a decision, because in case of an audit, in the end, you will be the one who will have consequences. So I would say that this is the most challenging, to take this decision, because also in the end, here we've been discussing about this like 20 minutes. I've seen many cases, and still, if I was in this situation with my company, I don't know what would I do, So imagine an SME owner, they have many topics. I mean, they don't have time to study in detail all the rules, to analyze, and then to take wise decision, and they have to do it. So I think this is the most challenging.
Yeah, when the system can't give you a clear reply,
And as you said before, it seems also a little bit unfair, right? That we really invite SMEs to participate in European projects. And I think it's great benefit. But at the same time, the rules are not helping them.
Yeah, they're the ones with the biggest risk of the beneficiary types, and they're the one with, on that note, on that positive note, EU projects are great. You should all join.
Yeah, in the end, if you take a decision, then it will go smooth.
Yeah. Alicja, this was the first episode. Now, before I make an outro, we maybe just say, look, so the next episode coming up, we will have a look at the freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's also quite delicate. Need to understand how that works. So we'll zoom in on that. In the third episode, we will have a look at the implementation challenges in the EIC accelerator program.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, in the episode 4 that we sketched out here, we will have a look at the most challenging financial rules for SMEs in EU projects. So we will be circling around these elements of eligibility and financing rules and so on for the smallest of you in when you approach EU funding. So you can look forward to that. Now, I'm just going to make an outro here before we say goodbye to the listeners. So thanks for listening to this. I hope that this has been informative, both for SMEs out there, but also for facilitators. So you'll have many grants consultants and public supporters out there that might find this relevant, that you can refer to this episode if you want to listen to this. If you find this interesting, you can also go to my website, my platform, thegrant.eu. There's a lot of information there relevant for also SMEs, but also facilitators, and it is categorized in buttons, so you can go into my podcast universe and you can click and find what's most relevant for you. Now, when you are there, do yourself a favor, and also if you have sympathy with what I'm doing here, do me a favor and subscribe to my email list. You'll find that in the bottom of each site, but you'll also find it at the top of the main page of my platform. Finally, do go and connect with me on LinkedIn and go and give my page, The Grant, a like. Connect to that, because then you'll get the flow of information as it moves on. This is where I have my marketing. This is where I also pick up guests. And this is where I share stuff also. So everybody who's interested in getting a healthy flow of information about what's going on in the community, then it's a good place to be. That's that.
Thank you.
We managed, Alicia, to get the first episode in the box. Thanks for joining me. Let's say goodbye to the dear listeners. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Grant. All the Grant episodes have their own site on the Grant website. You'll find the link to the episode site where you listen to your podcast. On the site for this episode, you'll find a link to Alicia's personal LinkedIn site and a link to Polite Europe's website. Further, there's a link to the IPI help desk site and the NCP overview. Next week, I have the wonderful Ilaria Rodisi in the studio to give the authoritative The Grant episode on MSCA proposal preparation. You can look forward to that.